Dr. Dan Teich received his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from the Ohio State University in 2003. Since that time, he has been practicing medicine in the DC metropolitan area, where his practice has focused on serving the unique needs of pets and clients in an urban setting. He has also served as the medical director for the Washington Humane Society, finding forever homes for homeless pets and assisting DC's too often forgotten pet population. In addition to that, Dan is a horticulture volunteer with us at the U.S. Botanic Garden. Many of the photos you'll see in Dan's presentation were taken at the garden. Over to you, Dan.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Elizabeth. As Elizabeth said, I am a horticultural volunteer with a small little but very dedicated crew. Today's talk combines two passions of mine, plants and pets. And the intersection of both. Today we're going to talk about some plants that are not so pet friendly and some that are pet friendly. The topic is hours long, but we're going to condense to a few special little friends here. So without further ado, we're going to start our little talk here. The first note that I really want to have to everybody is the most common question that I get. Poinsettias will not kill your cat. We see this all the time, every single year. Everybody says poinsettias are a toxic plant that are going to kill the cat. And the answer is no. They are members of the Euphorbia family, and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. But they are not going to kill your cat. That begs the question, what is poisonous versus irritant or toxic? Not everything that is technically bad for your pet is deadly. And it's important to have that distinction when talking about the pets and the plants in your house. Poisonous plants are plants that require immediate attention and intervention. Otherwise, they can have a lasting negative impact on your pet. Irritant/mildly toxic ones won't have lasting consequences, but will have immediate problems or issues. So back to our little best friend, poinsettias. Poinsettias are in family of Euphorbia. It includes pencil plants, cactus, and basically a bajillion different plants. There's innumerable plants are in the Euphorbia family. The good news is that although they are irritant, they will not permanently harm your pet. They almost all have a thick, irritating, whitish sap when you either break off a piece of them or chew on them. And this can cause contact itching with the skin, excessive salivation, drooling, pawing at the mouth, and vomiting. But the effects are temporary and will resolve usually on their own, or you can, with minor attention, you can wash these things off and it goes away. Pencil plants are much more irritating than poinsettias to a large degree. The pencil plant that you see in the picture here on the left side is in my living room. It started off as a small piece and now it hits the ceiling. They have a lot more sap, and if you break off a small piece of it, it will drip onto the floor. And it really is irritating to human skin too. On the right are a bunch of poinsettias from the production greenhouses of our friends at Smithsonian Gardens. If you ever have the opportunity to see a tour of their production greenhouse, especially just before Thanksgiving, you'll be treated to a large, festive, multiple rooms of poinsettias, but they are not going to permanently harm a cat. Moving on are our friends in the Araceae family, which includes Dieffenbachia, pothos, ever popular bathroom plant that it is, Monstera, also known as the Swiss cheese plant, Schefflera, and a million others. They're extremely common houseplants. In fact, probably the most common are in the Araceae family. Like euphorbias, they are irritants. They will cause swelling in the mouth, excessive drooling, but temporary problems. On the left is a pothos currently in the garden court of the United States Botanic Garden. There's a whole bunch of these there. I think it's called neon, and with good reason. The color is just crazy. And on the right is a Dieffenbachia. Again, these are extremely common plants. Pothos is generally safe around cats. It might cause some irritation, but it's not really going to cause anything severe. But that being said, this plant is just evil. This is a Dieffenbachia in the tropics of the USBG. It's located underneath the stairs that are going up to the catwalk in the tropics. This type of plant and all the others in its class contain what we call insoluble calcium oxalate crystals. These are teeny little microscopic crystals that are released by the plant when it is chewed on or if it's disturbed. So if you cut it, you chew on it, they release these tiny little crystals. They're not absorbed by the body, but they poke you. And the body really doesn't like it, especially the gums and the gingiva really doesn't like these things. And it could be quite painful. Clinical signs usually abate within an hour or so. But this particular plant, I don't know what it is. From personal experience, it will irritate you like crazy. So if you have this one in your house, just be very careful and wear gloves when handling it, especially when removing any dead leaves. Dieffenbachia. Oh, there we go. Our little kitten friend here is a little bit tired of hearing that she can't chew on these things. If she believes that, she's really not going to like our next group of plants. The previous ones were just irritants / mildly toxic. The next ones are just outright poisonous. Azaleas and rhododendrons can be deadly, especially to dogs. Cats tend to avoid them because they're outdoor plants. But dogs may be much more interested in these. They contain something called a granotoxin, which can lead to decreased blood pressure, vomiting, and even seizures. A flower or two, if your dog eats a flower or two, is not going to have an effect. But larger quantities really should be considered an emergency. If your dog eats lots of flowers or is just chomping away the plant, you need to see a veterinarian immediately. While poisonous, most dogs don't usually casually eat them. But I must say, they do make a great backdrop for your dog. This is Brian, my golden retriever. The previous photos and this photo are from our friends at the United States Arboretum. It's a great place to walk your dog, and the azalea collection is out of this world, so I do highly advise walking through there. But don't let your dog eat the azaleas, please, for several reasons. First and foremost is that they can be quite toxic. Returning back to our United States Botanic Garden, we have two cycads. I will say these photos are brand new from this morning. These two that you see here are some of our heritage plants. They were collected around 1840. Cycads, also known commonly as sago palms, can be toxic and deadly. This is something to be very serious to especially dogs. All parts of the plant are toxic, but the poison within them is concentrated within the seeds and can lead to acute liver failure and death. It's not something to be joked around with. It's more of a problem in more tropical environments than here, because up here, a cycad won't survive your winter, generally speaking. But further south, outside, they will flower, they will produce seeds, they will produce their pods, and those can be toxic and cause liver failure. A nibble on a leaf isn't going to lead to problems. So don't worry if your dog just nibbles on a leaf briefly, it's not going to cause a problem. But ingesting any amount of seeds should be considered an emergency. Ingesting an entire frond is definitely an emergency and should be, you should immediately consult your veterinarian or an emergency hospital of sorts. Closer to home, foxglove, lily of the valley, and oleander. Foxglove is a very common garden plant. It's extremely showy. And along with oleander and lily of the valley, they contain cardiac glycosides, which can cause a massive drop in blood pressure, causing what we call cardiovascular collapse and even seizures. Foxglove, just as an interesting note, has been displayed numerous times within our medicinal garden room because it's where we get the heart medication digitalis. A lot of people that have heart failure are on digitalis, which is made out of foxglove. But you can also see that ingesting it on its own can definitely cause some serious issues. Not to be outdone, we have true lilies. Lilies are deadly. We're just going to say that right out. Lilies are deadly. In my experience here in the city, this is our biggest problem with toxicity in cats. Water lilies, Easter lilies, tiger lilies, which grow outside, they're all toxic. I cannot stress to you enough, if you have a cat, do not bring lilies into your house. Again, do not bring lilies into your house. The entire, there's no photo here because this is the serious part. The entire lily plant is toxic. The stems, the leaves, flowers, pollen, even the water. And a lot of cats will drink the water out of the vase. The water is toxic. Small amount, even including just a little bit of pollen on their fur, if it brushes along the lily and they clean themselves off later, can cause fatal kidney failure. Even with lots of treatment, a lot of these cats do not live. So please take very care. It should be noted that peace lily is not a lily. Neither is a calla lily. They are not a lily. They're an Araceae, which we discussed earlier. Although they don't completely come in peace, they will not kill your cat. But please take care of lilies. It's seriously the most pressing plant problem that we have here in the city. But of course, we just don't want you to be depressed all the time. Many plants are safe around pets, especially indoor house. A lot of indoor house plants are perfectly fine around your pet. And the first we're going to start with are orchids. Yes, orchids. Huge family, lots of different varieties. Some look friendly, some look evil, some drop flowers all over the place, but they're not toxic. I've got a couple growing here in my house. In our vet hospitals, we have orchids on display because we know if something happens accidentally, it's not going to be a problem. A little plug here for the joint United States Botanic Garden and Smithsonian Orchid Show. It's currently at the Kogod Courtyard in the American Art Museum / National Portrait Gallery. It's there through the 24th. A couple photos have come from here in this presentation. One of the Dieffenbachias is from here. And this is just a tour de force of orchids. But your cat will not have a reaction to eating the orchids that's negative. They may vomit. That's with any plant. Ingestion of any plant can cause vomiting, but they're not going to hurt your cat. Another friendly houseplant that we have on display in large quantities is the Boston fern. These are perfectly fine to have around pets. Again, not toxic. They may cause mild gastrointestinal upset, but they're not going to have any long-lasting effect. So that's a very happy one to have around in the house. Bromeliads. Bromeliads are just totally awesome. I think that they're just fascinating entire family of plants. Pineapple is a bromeliad, which is really hard to believe. A pineapple grows up right through the middle of this plant. Although they do tend to look a little bit evil, and if you look carefully at the photo on the right, you'll see spikes on the edges of the leaves. They're not toxic, and they won't cause any long-lasting issues. So bromeliads are an absolutely spectacular plant to have at home. The only concern I have with the bromeliads is that when you water them, water may collect inside the between the leaves, and you really don't want a pet drinking that because God knows what will be growing in there, bacteria-wise, etc. But the plant itself is not toxic. Along these lines, you don't need a prayer if your cat eats a prayer plant. Calatheas, very common houseplant, are pet safe. These two are from the tropics at the Botanic Garden, and they're perfectly pet safe. They don't require that much light, they don't require much care, and they're completely pet safe. So I really do think that they're great to have in a house. That being said, when you have a lot of these things in your house, that the cat will say, that plant is mine. Tom is on the left. He's a pretty cool cat. And on the right is Margaret. And let me tell you, they'll see those plants and they'll be like, these things belong to me. And we'll have a discussion another day about how to control access to these to plants and pets. Roses, perennial favorite, flower of the United States. Roses are thorny. They may have little pricks all over them, but they are perfectly fine to have in your garden and in your home. So if you have them on a dining room table and the petals fall off, don't worry about it. Pollen, not a problem. They are not toxic. These two are from the outdoor garden, the Botanic Garden during last season. But roses are a great plant to have in the house because you don't have to really worry about them and your pet. Spider plant. Again, very common house plant, pretty awesome, relatively easy to take care of. Problem with them is that they're an absolute delicacy for cats. They're safe, but they're enticing. Just imagine this thing hanging from a basket, dangling things. Cats love these. So if you have it, hang it up high. It's not going to hurt the cat. They can chew on it all they want. You just might not have a plant left if your cat has relatively easy access to it. So it's a pretty cool plant, relatively easy to take care of, but your cat's going to look at it as it's the world's best treat. The most common ingestion question that we have for dogs is our next little one. Grass. This is just any old common lawn here in the District of Columbia. You know, nobody really knows where this one is. Grass. Grass is tasty. Dogs love grass. They'll just munch it. Same with cats. It tastes good. There's been all sorts of studies trying to figure out, why do they eat grass? Like, why do cats love grass? Why do dogs love grass? And we think in the end, it's really just because they like it. A lot of times they'll eat it and they'll vomit. And it's usually because they want to vomit. They eat the grass to make themselves vomit. That's one thought. Another thought is that it provides roughage for their diet and it just transits through their intestines. A lot of the times they eat these things because it pushes out parasites as it goes through their intestines. So we're not really sure. But it's perfectly safe. Regular grass is perfectly safe. Cat grass, you get that question a lot. Is cat grass safe? You know, where you go and you buy a little bowl and it contains a bunch of ryegrass seeds. Ryegrass is perfectly safe to a cat. And they can consume it. It's not a problem. So the only problem that you would have with excessive grass is you want to make sure that they don't eat too much because it can actually ball up inside their stomach or inside their intestines and cause a blockage. So you do want to be careful with the amount they eat, but if they eat some, it's perfectly safe to consume. I would avoid crabgrass though. Crabgrass is quite different looking than our regular ryegrasses, and that can be a problem. So let's be very careful about those. The plants that we just discussed are our most common either indoor houseplants and some of the outdoor houseplants. This is by far not an extensive delve into our plants. Quick little note that I keep on forgetting, that your common jade, like jade plant, perfectly safe in the house as well. It's not going to cause any problems to your pets. The problem comes in when you get to more exotic plants that people bring in from the tropics that we don't have a lot of experience in. And good news is that we know that the different families generally tend to go according to their same level of toxicity, such as in euphorbia, we know that pretty much they're not toxic. We know that anything in the foxglove, oleander kind of group is a problem. We know that roses are fine, anything in the rose family. And same thing with a lot of the arums, they're perfectly fine too. But there may be varieties that we're just not sure of because they're brand new to the plant trade. So we're always a little bit on the cautious side of these things. A really important to note is that plants and pets can coexist. Just as for humor, this is a garden by my mother's house. And I have no idea what's going on, but I can tell you that the cat is not getting into these. I don't have to worry about that, but you don't have to have all your plants wrapped up. And another day, we're going to discuss some techniques on how to deal with this, but you don't need to have everything wrapped up. They can coexist and be perfectly fine. A couple important resources. When you bring a new plant into the house, it is important to know, first of all, if it's going to be pet safe, especially if you can't have it completely isolated from your pets. The Pet Poison Helpline has a whole listing of plants that would help you understand if they're toxic to your pet. If you're not sure and it's after hours, the ASPCA runs the Pet Poison Control Center. It is a fee. Same with Pet Poison Helpline, but their website has a lot of information that is free. And last but not least, definitely not least, ask us. Ask us, your veterinarians. We're very happy to look things up, and we do it all the time. None of us can maintain an encyclopedic knowledge of the entire kingdom of plants as to what's toxic. So we frequently look it up and through our resources. So never hesitate to give us a little buzz to see what you want about your plants and how they can coexist. And of course, all you, thank you for tuning in here. We're going to answer some questions. And this is a lotus. A lotus is not a lily. And lotus are safe for pets. And this was taken at our friends over at the Kenilworth Aquatic Garden in Northeast. So if you have a little pond, I don't recommend using water lilies. I recommend using lotus. It's easier to take care of. They're perennial and they're non-toxic. The same thing with papyrus. Papyrus is perfectly fine, and that's an easy one to use in a little pond as well. So I'm going to give this back to Elizabeth for any questions.
Thank you so much, Dan. We do have plenty of questions for you. So to start off with, if your pet eats something that is in the irritant category, will they learn not to eat it again?
Probably not.
Okay.
I'd like to say yes, but some will learn not to eat it, and it does happen frequently, but a lot may not. So I wouldn't anticipate that outright that your pet's going to learn not to eat that. Some will, but I would not consider that I wouldn't consider it a learning lesson right off the bat.
And are there any vegetables that we eat that are toxic to our pets?
Vegetables, not necessarily, but grapes. Grapes are deadly to dogs, maybe. Not all grapes, we're not sure. This is only something that we're figuring out from the past 10 years. Previously, we had no idea. But grapes can cause kidney failure in dogs. Any ingestion of a grape, even if it's one, is considered a medical emergency. And we need to get the grape out. So grapes. Lettuce is fine. Carrots are fine. Cucumbers are fine. Any vegetable that we cook is generally considered fine. But one of the things that you don't want to eat are onions. Onions can be toxic to dogs and cats. They can cause a hemolytic anemia. You want to avoid leeks. Leeks as well are pretty dangerous. And last but not least, I would avoid mushrooms. Although they're not plants, I know. Mushrooms are not plants. I'm sorry, but
we'll allow it. We will allow this answer about mushrooms.
They come out of the dirt. So I would avoid mushrooms. Generally, like your button mushrooms that you have from the fridge are fine. Like they're not going to cause problems. It's the wild mushrooms, unpredictable wild mushrooms outside. So I'd be very very careful with wild mushrooms.
So, I mean, basically the same advice as for humans. Also be careful with wild mushrooms.
Yes.
Somebody is asking, when you're talking about onions, is that just the bulbs or is it the tops? Like, what about wild onions growing in your lawn?
Good question. Mostly the bulb. That's the case. That'll segue into something else about bulbs. The bulbs are generally the problem, especially with onions and tulips. Tulip bulbs are toxic. They're not crazy. So if you have a Labrador and it eats one tulip bulb, it's probably going to be fine. But if they like a bag of tulips, it can really cause some serious issues. Same thing with hyacinth. Hyacinth are toxic, as well as daffodils. And with most of these guys, the toxins are concentrated within the bulb. That doesn't rule out that, you know, the leaves of tulip leaves, they can be problematic, but they're not going to be serious because most of the toxic stuff is concentrated within the bulbs. The problem is that with onions, all parts of the plant are toxic. So I really wouldn't give your dog chives because chives are onions, onion juice, powders. I would avoid those.
Someone is specifically asking about onion skin. I will assume that's a no too from what you're saying, but I'll let you.
That is a no.
Okay.
It's an absolute no. Just don't do it. Onion is really not that toxic. Just get that out there. Like, I've never seen an onion toxicity. It just, don't play games with it.
Okay. And so another follow-up on something you said earlier, you mentioned too much grass being a bad thing. When you say too much, approximately how much do you mean?
I mean, if you've got some nibbles, who cares? It's if they eat like a ball of grass. If you eat several shreds of grass, like if you have a dog that's going around, it's going to be really hard for a dog to overeat with grass. And granted, I have seen them eat all sorts of things. Tennis balls whole, so it wouldn't surprise me. But generally speaking, if a dog's munching on grass, I wouldn't be really concerned. I'm a little more concerned about cats. If you have like one of those cat grass containers, it's about like a 3-inch, 4-inch cat grass container, and they eat half of it, I would not let them eat half of it. I'd say maybe a quarter, because it can ball up in their stomach because it's not digestible. So it can ball up in their stomach. So I would worry about that causing maybe an obstruction.
So speaking of things our cats might be eating, can you tell me a little bit about catnip?
Oh, catnip. If catnip had the same effect in humans as it does in cats, it would probably be a C1 controlled substance. Catnip is awesome. I mean, cats just have a great effect with it. It's got the active ingredient is how do you say it? I can never remember how to pronounce it. Nepetalone, I think it's called. It's an oil, and it enters the mouth and binds into the brain. It binds to the olfactory bulb in the brain and in the amygdala, and it really sends like an emotional response to cats. They basically get high. There's no other way around it. They get high. It saturates all the receptors in the brain, and they are just high. It's the same thing as in humans. And what's interesting about it, though, it only affects cats that are 6 months and older. It only really affects cats that are sexually mature, which I thought was fascinating. But the effects are short-lived. Your cat is not going to be stoned for days. It's only going to have its high for about 10 or 15 minutes. All the receptors will be saturated, and once they're saturated, then they get down-regulated afterwards. But they're still saturated, so it takes a while for them to clear out. As with a lot of drugs, some cats can actually develop a tolerance to catnip. It reminds me of The Princess Bride. They can develop a tolerance to something. So we really suggest that you don't use it every day, that you use it every couple of weeks for your cat. This way they can still enjoy it, but it's a fascinating herb. Completely safe. It's not going to cause any issues. And it's a member of the mint family, which I thought was kind of neat.
Is there anything that has a similar effect for dogs as catnip does for cats?
Ooh. Not that I know of. Not that I actually know of. I will say, considering of effects and getting stoned, I would avoid cannabis for your dogs and your cats. This is plants and pets, and it's a plant. So, and a lot of people, and a number of people are starting to grow it at home. So I would definitely avoid contact with that. It will cause your pet to be high. The good news is that it will not kill your pet. Your pet will be stoned. We see these pretty frequently, where somebody comes home and their dog is drooling. It can't keep it's dripping urine, and they look stoned. Supportive care and they're fine. But if you have a cannabis plant at home, please keep your pets away from it, because all parts of the plant will cause issues. Good news is it's fleeting. I've never heard of, in my experience, a pet having permanent damage from this, but again, not something I think that you would want to experience in your own home.
So we spoke a little bit before about vegetables for pets, and somebody is asking, what about corn husks? This person has a cat who absolutely loves them. Lots of vomiting, but the cat still seems to be crazy about them. Is that okay?
No. Sorry. I know your cat loves it. I know they do, but the biggest problem with that is you really worry about it not being ingested and causing a foreign body obstruction. You're dealing with a lot of cellulose. Cats are not like rabbits. They're not like cows. They don't digest cellulose. Teeny amounts, not a problem. But, the problem is that you're really worried about causing an impaction. If they play with it, it's fine. I don't care if they play with it. It's perfectly fine. But if they are ingesting decent amounts, you really have to worry about an intestinal obstruction.
Okay, we've got a few sort of specific plant families or plants that people are asking about. Sansevieria. Oh,
I love Sansevieria. You don't need to do very much with them. Low-level light plants. They're not very tasty. I can tell you that Sansevieria is not very tasty.
Is that from personal experience? You're the one chewing on the Sansevieria?
I will neither confirm nor deny this. But generally speaking, I think that Sansevieria should not really be chewed. It's going to cause your vomiting and diarrhea, but it's not going to be long-term toxic to your pet. The same thing goes with aloe. Aloe vera topically is fine, but when you're dealing with ingesting it, aloe vera actually has some other ingredients in it that should not be ingested. I was thinking about it when I was doing this, putting everything together. I was walking through the garden saying, taking pictures and saying, what do I want to include? And I saw aloe and I was like, do I really want to include this or not? So I guess the segue is topically it's fine. Ingested, it's an irritant. It's going to cause problems, but it's not going to cause long-term problems. If you have a Sansevieria in your house and a dog just goes by and chomps on a leaf, it's not going to be a problem. It's just that if they start eating it excessively, it will be. I don't think they will. It's just not appetizing. And I will tell you that in my office, I see I say something in there about CBD. Diane White, I'll get to you in a second there. But in our office, we actually have a large Sansevieria that a client gave us. We have two of them. They have never been touched. I actually have it in the lobby out of curiosity to see if somebody will eat it. I know it's not going to hurt them, but they have not been touched, in one of them in 4 years and the other in 3 years.
So while we're on the sort of specific plant subjects, begonias. are a question mark for us?
Not toxic.
Okay. How about Norfolk pines?
I would worry very much about the leaves and the sap causing irritation. Begonias are not toxic. In fact, if you have a begonia at home and you want to try something neat, eat a flower. Seriously. It's got like, if you just get a ripe flower, you just crunch it, it's got this intense, interesting flavor. When we were on an expedition going through Peru, we would identify our begonias by eating them. And it just has this, if you've never eaten a begonia flower, so it's an experience.
Okay, fair enough. How about ferns?
I would avoid ferns. Boston fern isn't really like a true fern, but ferns vary highly, and some of them can be quite problematic. I don't think any of them will really kill your pet. And I say this, I don't mean to be flip when I say this, but it's in my world, is something going to cause a big problem, or is it going to be a fleeting problem? Most ferns will be fleeting, and you worry about them being digestible, but most ferns are not going to cause an issue. Most of them are non-toxic, but I would avoid it just because they're, they can cause obstructions. But if you have ferns in your house, I wouldn't really be worried about them and your pet. Ferns are, generally speaking, fine to have around your pet.
So you noticed this question, and we'll get back to it. So do you think CBD is okay for cats? It sounds like it's been recommended for some reasons.
The CBD is fine in appropriate doses. CBD, so long as it doesn't contain any of the active, like the other compounds that are found in the cannabis plant, that's fine. If it doesn't contain THC or minimal THC, it's perfectly fine. We do use it pretty frequently now. It's getting more frequent. So CBD should not have any long-term or any ill effects. It may have positive effects, and we're seeing it start to enter the veterinary world a little bit more over time. Whether or not it has true benefits is still open to debate, but it's not going to be harmful. And I think that's the most important thing.
Okay, what about tomato plants?
The tomato itself is fine. It's the leaves that we're worried about. Tomato plants are part of the nightshade family. And you do worry about, what's the toxin in there? I think it's solanine. And we do worry about it being potentially toxic to cats. So I would avoid cats eating tomato leaves, and especially the stems. I don't believe it's going to, nibbling is going to cause any serious effects, but I would avoid that one. Tomatoes themselves are fine, and a quick note for anybody tuned in, it was thought that tomatoes up until like the 1700s were toxic to people. Until some guy in my lovely home state of New Jersey publicly ate tomatoes in a town square. He was jailed, and everybody thought he was going to die. He did not. And that's how tomatoes started to become eaten in the United States. But the leaves themselves are not edible. So I would avoid the leaves, and especially the stems.
Got it. So we've heard some advice about cats, about dogs. Is there any specific plant advice you'd give for someone with kittens?
Kittens will eat anything.
But should they?
No. I mean, the problem you have with kittens is that they're smaller. So it takes less of something to cause problems. Their immune system isn't as well developed. They're not as well able to cope with insults that, say, a larger animal will be. And especially when you're considering things that are not digestible, you're worried more about obstructions. So that's why I would say be careful with cats and kittens, kittens and plants. That's probably the main concern with them. Another concern with kittens and cats and houseplants is them using the houseplant as a litter box. I was going to save that for another day, but a lot of cats will like to use your houseplant as a litter box. Besides being maybe a little bit gross, we do worry about what's in the soil and them eating the soil. There are some things in soil that are not great for your cat. Specific kinds of fungus are in the soil. Ringworm is in the soil. So I would say with kittens, I'm more concerned about the pot than I am about the plant. And plus, you don't want them starting to use your potted houseplants for a litter box anyway, because then they're going to start just doing that as adults.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like something we want. So specifically thinking about fruit, are there fruits that are safe for cats to eat? So the specific ones being asked are strawberries, bananas, watermelons. But I think if you know of any that are definitely safe, that's a good share.
They're all fine. I will tell you personally, my dog vomits whenever he eats a banana. I do not know why, but let me tell you, strawberries are his favorite. He loves watermelon. He loves blueberries. So they're all fine for cats. Although I've never seen a cat eat a strawberry before. If you have a cat that eats a strawberry, you have a very special cat.
Okay, so I've been saving this question sort of towards the end because it's got a little bit of a roundup feel to it. So this is somebody who is sort of naming out the categories of things you're trying to avoid, and they're interested in if you have any additional category you'd add to that list. So I'll go through the category list slowly so that you have time to hear them all, which is alkaloids, essential oils, saponins, and oxalates. Those are sort of the major ones that this person seems to think should be avoided. Are there any major categories that aren't included in that list that you'd like to add on? And I can say them again if that's helpful.
Oh, I mean, alkaloids, absolutely. You definitely want to avoid those. The saponins as well, they're probably not going to be anywhere near as bad, but the alkaloids are probably the worst of those. Let's see, what else do we have in there?
So we have the alkaloids, the saponins, the essential oils, so monoterpenes, and oxalates.
The oxalates we've already discussed earlier. The insoluble ones, this is where it gets to be, we have to have terms here. The insoluble ones are not a problem. They're the ones that, like have them like in euphorbia and those guys. They're not a problem. I'm not sure in plants if there are any that are soluble. That's one thing I am uncertain of. But I can tell you that a soluble oxalate is antifreeze. Antifreeze are soluble oxalates. So just as FYI, and those will jam up your kidneys and kill you. Human, pet, does not matter. So the oxalates are, generally speaking, as long as they're not soluble, are not going to be a long-term problem. They're going to be a short-term irritant. Those are actually the main groups. The other thing is that you have the cardioglycosides, which we discussed in foxglove, and then you have just the strange compounds like in cycads. That thing is those chemicals in cycads are really pretty bad for you. Human too. I mean, there's a disease in Guam amongst people that are native to Guam with cycads that's well recognized to cause liver failure in native peoples of Guam. So we have to be careful with that. I think the biggest problem that we have is just the unknowns. It's the unknowns. Other things that, we're discussing essential oils. Essential oils, the term itself can mean almost anything with a lot of things. So we have to be careful with those. But the most, the biggest problems and the most common ones that we need to avoid in cats, especially wintergreen, oil of sweet birch, citrus oil, pennyroyal, eucalyptus, excuse me, and tea tree. Tea tree should not be ingested. And that's a common one that people I don't understand where that came from, but tea tree oil especially should not be ingested. And you have to be careful about using it topically, because if you use it topically, a lot of times it's going to be ingested. So those are a number of, like, they're termed as essential oils that we really need to be careful of. And before using any of them, I would be very concerned and make sure that you consult your veterinarian in advance, that if they're safe around pets. Some of them are fine, but others I would be much more concerned about.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you one last question, and it'll just be to give us a little bit of a preview, because I think we're going to do another program that has that we talk about some of these areas. But what's maybe your top tip for helping keep your plants away from your pets? I mean, your pets away from your plants. The plants are usually pretty stationary, to my knowledge.
Usually. One of my tips, that if you're uncertain as to what to do, if you're really afraid of your plants and your pets and you're not sure, you can get Planty McPlant. Planty McPlant is from IKEA. He's plastic. So if you have a plant, if you have a cat that will eat plants and you're not sure what to do, a plastic plant is never a bad idea. But in the serious world, separation. And separation is key. If you have a cat that loves to eat plants, keep their plants in a separate room. Or if you have a dog that seems to have a penchant for your pencil plant, make sure it's high enough, or the pot is tall enough that they can't get into it. I think that separation is the biggest point that we have with these things. It's, I've got a huge banana plant. It's behind a rack. My dog doesn't touch any of these things, but that's where it is. I will say that a number of years ago, I had a golden retriever named Jacob. He was perfectly fine with everything, an angel of a dog. And one day I came home and he ate my redwood tree. I had the thing for 6 years and I came home to a stump. I can't explain it. He just ate it one day. And he'd never done anything like that before. And he never did anything like that since. One day he just said, this redwood tree is delicious. So my biggest single piece of advice is avoidance. Keep them separate. But when you do that, have things that you don't have to worry about. If a leaf falls off, it's not going to be problematic.
Well, great. Thank you so much. So thank you, Dan, for sharing your plant and pet wisdom with us. Thank you to our audience for attending. So this concludes today's program.